Hey all, Heretic here, and today in the Battlegrounds we are continuing with our series on guides on how to play tribes in the Trinket meta. Today we're going to jump in to the Murloc tribe. We're going to go over all the different minions, heroes, trinkets, spells, strategy, setups. You've got questions, I've got information. Let's put it together and see what we get. All right, we're going to start with minions because we need to know what we're playing so we can make them work. Now, if you're an advanced player who's been playing for a long time, you probably don't need to know most of these. We're just going to go over all the individual Murlocs and what they do and what minions also would be important in a Murloc build. Now, that being said, there are some we're not going to cover. And I'm sorry, I'm going to use you for an example. King mrglin'burglar. We don't care. It's a battle cry, it gives stats. There's a lot of different Murlocs like this. We're going to skip those. There's not as many as there used to be, but there's still a lot. Now, first thing we're going to start with is the Blazing Skyfin. This is a tier 2, 2/4 Murloc dragon. After you trigger a battle cry, gain +1/+1. Now, you're sitting there going, Heretic, you just said you're not going to cover battle cries. And you're right. Not all of them. This isn't a battle cry. This is a minion that benefits from the battle cries. Now, the only reason why I bring this minion up is because of the way it was changed. Originally, it was every time you play a battle cry minion, you get to buff this. But if you'll notice, the wording is after you trigger a battle cry. So no matter how you get that battle cry to activate, for every number of times it activates, this is going to gain +1/+1. So if you have any way to increase the number of times it triggers, if you can trigger it with spells, stuff like that, you're going to get extra value, making this early enough very good. I usually like this when there's one of these and a battle cry in the shop, say on turn 3 and 4, or two of these on the battle cry, and I was like, okay, yeah, no brainer, I'll run this. Next, we're covering Tad, and Tad's job's pretty easy. Tier 2, 2/2 Murloc. When you sell this, get a random Murloc. Don't buff this. If you can help it, don't put any stats on this thing. Why are you wasting stats on this thing? This thing's existence is for you to play it, and later, or the same turn, sell it, get a random Murloc, and move on. It's just good economy. You pay 3 gold for it, and if you get unlucky, you sell them both. You only paid 1 gold to cycle 2 Murlocs, and that usually gives you buffs, especially later in the game, that are well worth that gold. Tier 3, we have the Dire Muck Forager. 3/4 Murloc. Start of combat, give a minion in your hand +2/+2, then summon it for this combat only. Now, warnings about this Murloc. It's a random thing it summons in your hand. It doesn't have to be a Murloc, it can summon anything. The problem with that is, let's say for a couple turns you've had a minion in your hand, it's buffed up, it's like a 10/10, you're like, yay, I love it, I don't want to play it though, I want to keep it in my hand. But then you get a pair of something, but you don't want to play the other one because there's no room, because you need to leave room for Dire Muck to summon this out. When you summon, there has to be space to put that minion out there, and since it happens start of combat, that means you can't run more than 6 minions on your board if you want to summon it out. You will get the stats regardless, so if you're running a full board, this will continue to buff a random minion in your board, but it's not going to give you the one you want. The reason why I warn you about this is because if you have a 10/10 and you pick up something, let's say it's a pair setting up for a triple and that's a 2/2, just gonna buff and maybe summon the wrong minion, so be careful. This is definitely not the one you want to have later in the game to summon minions from your hand, but in the early game, in a pinch, it does the job. And now we've got a minion that works really well with the Dire Muck. That is the tier 3, 3/3 Murloc Scourfin. Give a random Murloc in your hand +5/+5. So let's say, for example, you're playing AFK. On turn 3, AFK gets discovered 2 tier 3 minions. Pretty good. First, you discover a Dire Muck. Not bad. Next, you discover a Scourfin. One of my favorite silly combos to happen, because you don't have to play the Scourfin. Keep it in your hand. It's going to get summoned out by the Dire Muck, and then when it dies, it's going to buff itself. So it's going to get the buff from the Dire Muck, the 2/2, so it's going to be a 5/5 when it gets summoned out. And then when it dies, the one in your hand is going to be a 10/10, and that can continue on for a couple turns. It's a fun way to do it until you get a full board. Yeah, it's probably still going to lose, especially if you're playing AFK that first turn, but after that, it starts to scale pretty well, and the value really, you get rewarded for it at that point. Next up, we have the tier 4 2/2 Murloc Lock Prince. Whenever this gains stats, add +2/+2 to that amount, wherever this is. And those +2/+2 are going to be permanent to any buff that doesn't come during the shop phase. And this is important because let's say you have a blood gem, it's a 1/1 buff. You play it on the Lock Prince. The Lock Prince gains 1/1, but then gains 2/2. So it increases any buff by 2/2, and if you can cycle a lot of buffs, this can get quite big quite fast. There's a lot of combo cards, especially later in the game if you're cycling a lot, where you're probably not going to want to cut this because it's just going to get so big. You're going to be looking to get rid of this just by spinning it, and that's about it, because without the spit spell, there's no way you want to sell this 80, 100, whatever it is once it's on your board. Next up, one of the most important Murlocs you'll never find and you'll always need, the Baskill. And I know you're going to tell me it's base skill. No, the Baskill, just because. This tier 4 7/2 Murloc, Death Rattle, summon the highest health Murloc from your hand for this combat only. Now this is why this is superior to the Dire Muck. Dire Muck can summon anything. Doesn't have to be a Murloc, it can be any tribe. This one though is going to specifically summon out the highest health one in your hand, the one you've been buffing a whole lot. It's going to summon it out in this room because it only summons it out when this dies. So you can much easier get the value out of this one than you can the Dire Muck, because, well, Dire Muck's summoning a random one. You need to leave room on the board to summon it out. This one is just going to kick it out, and it's going to be great. Baskill is going to be the one you're always looking for, and you probably never find enough. Supreme Counter is a tier 4 4/4 Murloc. While this is in your hand after you play a Murloc, gain +3/+3. Now this is regardless of any other system you have that might be buffing things in your hand, spells, trinkets, minions. Doesn't matter. If you play a Murloc, this gains 3/3 in addition, which if you've got a Baskill going, you want to make sure it's got a nice big thing to summon. This is the best example. Now, let's say this is a 26/26 and you're sitting there and you're about to die and you have no way to get it out of your hand. You didn't find a Dire Muck, you didn't find a Baskill. Play it. I know it hurts, but if you play it and you die, no loss. But if you hold it in your hand and you die, and you realized if it had been on the board, you would have won, in the next turn, there had been a way to get it out of your hand later, say a Dire Muck or that Baskill, you'd be all set. Because when you triple it, it's going to go back to your hand. That's the downside to this minion when you triple it, is you never get the triple reward because you're not going to play it once it's gold. Once it's gold, you can't bounce it back to your hand. But if you play it while it's normal and then later triple it, it's not so bad. You can at least get some value. And if you're dead, it doesn't matter how big it is in your hand. You're dead and you never got to play it. That sucks. Next, we have the Fairy Guildmother, a 1/5 Murloc. At the end of your turn, get a random Murloc. Now, it's random what it gives you, but Murlocs often need generation. And if you can get this on your board to stick for a little while, you can get some value out of this. It does work with Drakari Enchanter. You just typically don't want a Drakari Enchanter with this unless I am really ahead. The Fairy Guildmother is gold. That's kind of the only way. Just feels really clunky. There are boards where it can work in times when you can do it, but like I said, you've got to kind of be way ahead. Moving up to tier 5, we have the Depraved Felfin. This is a 4/3 Demon Murloc. After you discover a minion, gain the stats of the other options. Now, I don't love Depraved Felfin normally, because oftentimes in a Murloc board, I'm having a hard time trying to figure out which one to play. I've got a lot of different things on the board and I kind of want to keep them all and I need space. So this often gets cut unless I'm playing certain heroes. Why certain heroes? Well, because if you're playing Scabs, every time you use your hero power to discover something, he's eating the other one. Let's say you're playing Bigglesworth. Someone dies. It offers you 3 golden 200/200s. You sit there for a little while, you really hem and haw about it, then you pick the 200/200 that's the best for your board. It's a brand, it's a golden brand, it's a 200/200. Yay! Depraved Felfin then eats the other 2 golden 200/200. So you gain 400 in stats. So it's kind of hard not to like Depraved Felfin with the right heroes at the right time. Just be careful. Oftentimes, he's just hard to fit on your board. Operatic Belcher is a 5/2 Murloc that has Venomous, Death Rattle, give a friendly Murloc Venomous. Now, this is the first minion with Venomous we've encountered with Murlocs. Venom is the moment it deals damage to a minion and that minion will die from the Venom goes away. Doesn't seem too bad. It's getting to kill whatever it hits, so who cares? The nice thing is the Death Rattle gives one of your random Murlocs the same thing, Venom again. Not a bad deal. Definitely a great Murloc. If you can buff this and keep this in your hand with a Baskill, You can really get some good value out of this, but typically your hand's usually full of bigger Murlocs. But depending what trinkets you have going, there's usually some ways you can get some shenanigans going. But it's never bad to have on your board. If you need to, you can throw a Titus out there to get some extra death rattles to just pivot off and throw more venom on your other guys. And hell, you could use a monstrous macaw if you're desperate and your opponent's big enough. You could even reborn the macaw and you could just pop some venom around. You're kind of desperate at that point. You know, we've all been there, but just options for you. Primal Fin Lookout. Now, this is a 3/2 Murloc battle cry. If you control another Murloc, discover a Murloc. Was the mainstay of Murlocs in kind of what made Murlocs great. Get this on the board, you'd cycle it, you'd get a young murk-eye, we're gonna cover him later. You'd get a Rylak, put the Rylak next to him. Rylak would die in combat triggered. You'd summon more. If you had a brand, you'd get extra copies. Primal Fin used to be at tier 4 and defined when you could really do Murlocs. The problem is Primal Fin is tier 5 now and much harder to get. There's a lot less of them, and that higher tier makes it so you're getting them later. I don't know how well you can really pull the Rylak young murk-eye trick off anymore. You can at times if you high roll high enough, but it's really hard to pull off nowadays, and it really has hurt the tribe a lot. But it's still a fun way to play. When you get one, when you can slam it down and have a brand, discover those Murlocs you need, make those triples, just feels good. All right, tier 6, we have to cover the Arid Atrocity. This is a 7/7 all. Death Rattle summoning 7/7 Golem, give it plus 7/7 for each friendly minion type that died this combat. I include it because it's important to cover as much as I can, and well, Arid's a Murloc technically. There's nothing wrong with giving this thing venom from your Belcher, even if that's it. Let's say you just need some venom, now you want 2 minions. You could pick up a Belcher, have an Arid Atrocity, let the Belcher die, it's gonna give venom to the Atrocity, value. On a Murloc board, typically you don't see a lot of this. Sometimes they get popped out of the hand, sometimes they're in the back line because it was early. Typically in a late Murloc board, unless it's more of a scam build, we're not gonna see Arid Atrocities, but sometimes. Coral mrglin'burglar, however the hell you choke it out of yourself. Tier 6, 6/6 Murloc, start of combat, gain the stats of all the minions in your hand. Yes, all of them, whatever they are. You have 10 minions that give you 10,000, 10,000, well, he's a 10,006, 10,006. It's a good minion. You can't really go wrong with it. It's a big, nasty stat stick that will smash people, but you need to have things in your hand for it to have any value. And if you haven't noticed, important note about that, if you are fighting a Murloc player and you see his corals appear and you see them reach a certain level of stats, you now know what the largest minion that can be summoned from their hand by their bass skills is. So keep it in mind. When you see it, you can judge for yourself pretty quick how much trouble you might or might not be in. 1 Amalgam Tour Group. This is an all-type creature, 6/7. Whenever you play a card, give friendly minions of its tier or lower +1/+1. Now, this isn't really optimal, but you're cycling enough tier 5 and 6 cards, cycling Primal Fins and whatnot, maybe get a brand. This can scale your whole board up decent. Plus, if you have anything in your hand that's benefiting from you cycling Murlocs, this is pretty good. I really enjoy this card when I don't have better options. There are some better we'll cover later, but it is decent. If you hit it early enough, it can give you a lot of tempo. Murky is a 3/3 Murloc battle cry. Give a friendly Murloc +3/+3 for each one you control. Well, it's 7 Murlocs on your board. Counting Murky, that's a 21/21 buff. You have a brand, it's a 42/42 buff. You get the idea. This worked with young murk-eye. If you use it with a Rylak, which I kind of advise against unless you're desperate, maybe you hit it early enough and he's already on the board, it will give you stats, but they're temporary, so we don't really love that in this case, but it does do the job. Murky is very good with young murk-eye, especially if you can golden either one of them or both them and just keep him on the board forever, and just at the end of every turn, trigger that buff, trigger that buff. You can get pretty damn big board pretty quick. Young Murk-eye is an 8/5 Murloc. At the end of your turn, adjacent minions trigger their battle cries. Now, Young Murk-eye you will see in a lot of builds because it doesn't care what the minion is next to it. Any tribe, any battle cry, it's going to trigger it. You have a brand, it's going to trigger it twice. Do you have a Drakari? It's going to trigger him twice. And then if you have the brand, trigger that. But if you have a Drakari and a brand on your board, you're probably dead soon anyways, or hopefully fighting the dead guy and it was only for a turn because that is greedy. That is super duper greedy, but hey, you can win with it. Good for you. Have the big board, have fun. mrglin'burglar is a tier 6 6/6 Murloc. Also disturbing numbers there. Is this a demonic cowboy Murloc? I just like it might be a demon, it might be a cowboy, and it might be a Murloc all at once. After you play a Murloc, give a friendly minion and a minion in your hand +6/+6. That means anytime you play a Murloc, you're getting a 12/12 buff. Spread out, but we tend to cycle a lot of Murlocs, don't we? We have Trinkets that give us extra value from cycling Murlocs. mrglin'burglar is fantastic. Definitely cycling with him is the way to go. This is right now probably one of the best, if not the best card in the Murloc build typically. Getting 1, 2 of these, a gold one, it's a lot of stats going to your hand and your board. So mrglin'burglar, if offered to you, play it, cycle cards, have fun. And now for the greatest Murloc, who's not a Murloc most of the time, Bran Bronzebeard. We have to cover it, folks. We can't do a Murloc guide and not mention Bran full on with his own section if we're going over the minions. Tier 5, 2/4, horrible stats, you don't care. Your battle cries trigger twice. All those stats, all that minion generation, whatever you're cycling is worth it. Anytime you have a minion that has a battle cry to generate another minion is free with Bran if you can buy it. Because you're going to pay the 3 gold for it and you're guaranteed at least 2 other minions out of it. Now, if you triple something, if you just want to get something you want to keep, okay, it might not be free for you at that point, but then you don't mind paying for it. Bran is the backbone of a lot of Murloc builds for a long time because battle cries are what they do, and he makes you do it twice as well. We have to cover tier 7. Why do we have to cover tier 7? Because we want to cover everything as much as possible. We're going to start with a neutral tier 7, Moria Bronzebeard, a 3/9 neutral. Your battle cries and death rattles trigger twice. Now, obviously, Bran is great. He's at tier 5. You get him, you're all set. But what if you don't find a Bran? And what if you buy a Trinket, hero power, you steal it, however you get it, go to Moria. Well, now you're triggering those battle cries twice, just like Bran. But your death rattles, the Venom going off, your minions being summoned out of hand, that's also being doubled. So not bad. Now, the downside to Moria versus Bran is it's typically a lot easier to triple a Bran because, and I know that's not easy, but Bran is at tier 5 and actively in the game for everybody. Moria is only if you have a way to generate it yourself or steal it. Not exactly super common to get 3 of them. Also, certain trinkets. But that's besides the point. Moria works in a pinch if you don't have the Bran. If you can get a golden Moria, why not? Upgrade. Go for it. Next, we have Tide Oracle Morgul. Now, this is a 1/10 Murloc with poisonous. When this attacks and kills a minion, give its maximum stats to a minion in your hand. Now, poisonous you might not have seen because it's not super common nowadays. Poisonous is when you hit a minion, it dies. Well, that sounds just like venomous Heretic, right? You're right. But venomous goes away. Poisonous is permanent. As long as that minion's alive, it hits something and does damage to them that they actually take, no divine shield or anything, they die. So Tide Oracle Morgul is very, very good. And if you can be really cheesy and say, I don't know, have him be summoned by the Basquill, and then have him swing and kill somebody, he's buffing himself. Yeah, that's a painful one to watch happen sometimes. It'll just keep running out there, murdering something huge on the board, and absorbing those stats for the next combat. So yeah, I have seen him easily in the thousands in some games. Now, it's not super common. It's pretty rare to see one that big because they're tier 7. You don't see a whole lot of them, but you can do it. And they are disgusting. So I don't care if you got a Basquill it, Dire Muck it. If you can do it, do it. All right, let's jump into spells. Let's look at the ones we're going to be using. Now, Murlocs are going to use a couple. Won't take too long to cover it all. But typically, let's think late game. What do we need to do? We need to taunt something. Why? We don't want Leroy. We don't want Venom to hit the most important minions on our board. Typically, the minion I like to taunt the most is going to be a Bran in the late game. Now, through the early mid-game, Scourfin's a great choice because, hey, gonna die. That's great. Let's make sure he dies. Let's get those stats on the minion in our hand we're buffing. For those tricky trousers, Defender's Rights are the best. Get those things taunted, let them die, and reap the benefits. Now, since we're playing one particular tribe, this will apply to almost every video, but I want to cover it quick because I want to make sure I start doing this in all the time. Chef's Choice, Planar Telescope, easy to pick. You're playing one tribe, you know you're doing that tribe now. These spells are great to give you the minion type you need. Hired Hunt Hunter, if you have a brand in play, is usually going to be free, because if it doesn't give you a minion you want, you can generate more minions so it pays for itself. So that's always worth it with Murlocs. Obviously, if we're at tier 6, Lost Staff of Hamul is going to do a great job at giving us Murlocs, because guess what? It's all it can do. You target the tribe you want, it gives it to you. Now, word of warning with Lost Staff of Hamul, make sure you don't target a dual tribe minion. No guarantee it's going to pick the one you want. And Murlocs do get their own unique spell for this, and that is Cloning Conch. That is 4 gold, tier 4, get a random Murloc and a copy of it. Yeah, it's 4 gold, but you're going to get 2 minions, so essentially if you don't need any of them, it's really only 2 gold, and if it gives you something really good, something useful, something powerful, heaven forbid a Primal Fin, it's free. You're just going to town and you're having a good time. And if you have a Primal Fin on your board, you're always looking for Dreamer's Embrace. Why? You can target, trigger a battle cry. You can't really go wrong with that value. Those are the spells I use the most with Murlocs. Sure, there's other niche uses, but these are the most important ones. Now it's time to start with the heroes who like Murlocs. And we're going to start with Jandis Barov. Jandis's hero power is 0 to play, and it is swap, lock, and shop it. That is, swap a friendly, non-golden minion with a random one in the tavern. Now, Jandis is good, but the battle cries aren't quite as good as they used to be for swapping with Jandis. There used to be some better ones that gave more stats to your board. There's still King Bagurgle at tier 5, who's very effective at giving good stats to your board. There's Primal Fin at tier 5, that's very good at giving stats to your board. But other than health, there's not a whole lot at the lower tiers that's giving you a ton of value, making Jandis good with Murlocs, but not until the later game, and only if you find the right ones. And if you do decide to keep one of these on your board, say you're cycling a Primal Fin every turn, let's say you've got a young murk-eye on your board, and next to it is a Primal Fin, and you are just kicking off free Murlocs all you want. Feels great, right? You also can be swapping that Primal Fin all the time with your hero power to the shop and playing it. The only important note to remember is, of course, to not triple it with this hero, because if you triple the Primal Fin, you now can no longer swap it. Now that might not be a problem, because if you still have a young murk-eye sitting there and you have a golden Primal Fin, just let him do the work. You'll find other Primal Fins to cycle with your hero power every turn, or just get enough stats where it probably isn't going to matter. You've already won the game at this point. Millhouse Manastorm is another great hero for Murlocs. Millhouse has a very unique playstyle, and some people don't feel comfortable playing Millhouse because of that. Now, their hero power is passive. Minions and refreshes cost 2 gold. Upgrading the tavern costs 1 more. That refresh cost being 2 gold throws people off a lot. I love to play Millhouse. I play Millhouse all the time, but I've also had turns where I almost end. My chat's yelling at me and I've got a gold floating and I'm like, I only had more gold. And I'm just brain farting because Millhouse only costs 2 gold to buy a minion. If you've got one, sell one, buy one. It's easy, right? And I play Millhouse all the time. That's why it's intimidating to some people, especially if you're a lower MMR player and you see Millhouse and you're like, yeah, I don't want to. You really should learn him. It is not that different. It is a very important mechanic change, but you need to learn it because he's very, very good. Millhouse Manastorm, excellent with Murlocs because 2 gold to buy a minion. You're just cycling a whole lot. That means any hand buffing you have going on is getting more value. Now, the issue with Millhouse is that refresh cost. If you don't get good shops, you're gonna be in a little trouble. But your minions are cheaper to offset that, so just take advantage. Realize what trinket, what hero, what minions you have, and realize sometimes just cycling anything will do the job. Shudderwalk is a no-brainer. Their battle cry, Snicker Snack, is trigger a friendly minion's battle cry. Murloc's got battle cries everywhere. You got a Primal Fin? Hit it every turn. You can golden it and you can target it. You don't have to worry about it. Just have it sit there and kick out minions. Do you got a Murky? Target your Murky all you want. Murky's gonna throw stats around. You don't have to get rid of it. Or hell, are you generating enough cards? Play it, get the extra charge, sell it if you're doing that well. Don't worry about it. Shudderwalk is a hero that loves battle cries, and Murlocs are a tribe that love battle cries. Thus, go together really well. Hey, what do you need to play Murlocs really effectively in the late game? Bran. So that would make Dino Tamer Bran a great hero. Their hero power is Battle Brand, passive after you buy 4 Battlecry minions, get a Bran Bronzebeard once per game. Now, yeah, you only get your hero power once, but who cares? It's giving you a Bran. That's amazing value. All you have to do is buy 4 Battlecries, not play 4, buy 4. So don't waste your time with spells early trying to generate them. Don't worry about the patient scouts for that purpose because they're not going to count. You need to buy the minions on the board that have Battlecry to get them. But later, you've got a Bran, you've got Murlocs. They just go together. It's like peanut butter and chocolate, folks. Trade Prince Gallywix just wants you to cycle cards. Huh. I think Murlocs like to cycle cards. Smart Savings is his hero power. After you sell a minion, gain 1 gold next turn. There's no realistic limit to that, folks. Just cycle cards. Get your Patient Scouts. Get your Elementals. Get your random Murlocs. Cycle them all because next turn you have more gold. Now, I haven't played Trade Prince Gallywix very much this season, and that's on me. He's only been offered to me a couple times. My issue is his armor is so low, he's just naked in a field, and that makes me afraid. But you can pull it off if you can get going, if you can make it through that early game with minimal damage and get that tier 4, that turn 8 and after, you start cycling like crazy, you can go nuts. And if you pay attention to the spells, there's a good chance even early you could start building that economy fast. There's nothing quite like a shop with a couple Patient Scouts if you're playing Trade Prince. Don't fall into that trap of trying to keep one on the board. Cycle those things. That's gold for the next turn. And of course, we have to mention the tribe-specific hero, and that is Fungal Mancer Flurgle. Your hero power is Gone Fishing. After you sell 5 minions, get a random Murloc. That means anytime you sell any 5 minions, you get a Murloc. Yeah, it's random. It can be any Murloc, but you're going to be cycling cards. This is, once again, another hero who suffers in the early game, but definitely benefits, once again, turn 8 and later. So Flurgle, cycle everything you can. Those Patient Scouts, once again, those Elementals, generate extra Murlocs, have a good time, win some games. And hey, I have to ask, if you like these videos, please like, subscribe, come hang out on Twitch. We're over there. We've got a Discord. Everything's in the comments below. Look, I love doing this. I want to build this as much as we can. The more people are in there asking questions, giving me feedback, the better I can do this. So please, anything you've got for me, throw it at me in the comments. Come say hi, tell me what you think. I really do appreciate it. Thank you again, folks. All right, it's turn 6. Do we commit to Murlocs? Well, it depends on the trinkets offered to us. It depends what our board looks like. Obviously, if it's offering you a better trinket, something else, has to be a damn good reason not to take that better one. Maybe your hero only really likes to do this, but even then, if you're being offered something outright stronger, you should take the stronger thing and try to play that best you can. But let's talk about trinkets for Murlocs, and we want to play Murlocs. Let's live in that world. I say, really, in the lesser trinkets, the only one I really want that's Murloc specific are going to be Nurglish Phrasebook first. Now, that is probably the better of all of them to me in the early game because it's giving you so much stats. I mean, you are just getting, every time you play any minion, stats to a minion in your hand. Now, if you don't have a way to summon that out from your hand, you haven't found the Darmok, you don't have a base skill yet, it's turn 6, you probably don't, just play the minion, don't worry about it, unless there's a damn good reason you should hang on to it. Typically, you can actually pivot this into any build is what I like about it. If mechs are in, you've got a Deflecto bot and a reset minion on the board, oh my god, cycle like 5 or 6 cards on this thing, play that Deflecto and just let it stomp through the lobby, go play mechs, have fun. Another one I like, but it's a little hard to pull off, is Twin Sky Lanterns. Now, this is the lesser one, but this is when you have space, summon a copy of the first minion you summoned each combat. My problem with the lesser one of these, and the reason why I hesitate to tell you to take this one, is realistically, you only have a Dire Monk. I mean, there's a chance you have a base skill on the board, you tripled into it, you could be really lucky, and something in your hand to buff. It seems less likely. Typically, it's going to be summoned out by that Dire Monk. Now, that's great if you have something to buff and do that with, in which case, yeah, take this, buff the hell out of whatever it is, summon an extra one. But the warning is make sure you don't have any Death Rattle or Reborn minions on your board who can summon more crap first if you have a Baskill. Because if you have a Baskill and it doesn't die first and they kill, I don't know, a Bonehead, you're gonna summon a 1/1. And that 1/1 isn't going to feel good. So make sure you get rid of those other minions if the one in your hand's big enough to justify getting rid of all of those stats. Just cut them, let that thing carry you, have fun. Now, when it comes to greater trinkets, there's a lot of good ones for Murlocs. We're ignoring neutral, because neutral, there's so many things we could talk about with that. You're picking those because you feel like these aren't good enough or just straight up not offered to you. We're going to start with Bronzebeard Portrait. I mean, you get a brand and it's a Dragon Murloc. You really can't go wrong. Oh yeah, and all the brands are Dragon Murlocs wherever they are when you buy them in the shop later, so you can buff them too. This one is phenomenal because typically when you're playing Murlocs, you're looking for a brand, so it's not really a bad thing either. I definitely like this one. Now that we're in the later game, Twin Sky Lanterns, the greater version feels really good because you probably have a Bascule. You've probably got a big Bream counter in your hand. And hey, look, you're summoning it out. Oh, did you cheese it and you've got 2 Twin Sky Lanterns? Yeah, when you summon out, say, your 400 Bream counter from your hand, you're then going to summon out 4 more when there's room. So it really gets completely nutty. I adore this one when I'm doing any summoning from hand. Even if you're just summoning out Venom Murlocs. Oh no, I'm only summoning out 2 extra Venom Murlocs. It's always gonna feel good. Nurglish Phrasebook, the greater one, is amazing at giving you a ton of stats. My only concern about it at this point is that 6/6 buff to the leftmost minion in your hand being redundant. What I mean is, we already know we're in a Murloc lobby. It's late in the game. There's a lot of Venom. There's a lot of big divine shields. There's things to deal with your massive stats. Now, there are lobbies where, yeah, you know you're ahead. You know you're already bigger than everybody. No one's got time to scam you. Throw stats at them all day long. Murder them with stats. Bring out your 20,000 Murlocs. Have fun. Just be careful they don't get you running wild with stats and steal the win. Colorful Compass, the greater and the lesser. I should put that in the lesser, but let's just put it here for now. The lesser, if you're not offered anything else that works that you want to do, and you know you want to play Murlocs, why not take a Murloc every turn? It's worth it. The greater one going to give you 2 Murlocs a turn, even at random, since every time you often play a Murloc, it's buffing other things anyways, makes Colorful Compass, the greater one, phenomenal and always worth taking. Dreamer's Embrace, I love, but there's a couple situations where you need to have this to work. Really, you want to have a brand, and that means you then need to have a battle cry on the board to make it worthwhile. So there's some caveats to make this worthwhile. Obviously, if you're running like a young murk-eye and a primal fin, and you got a brand, and this is offered to you, yeah, have fun. It's turn 9. What are you doing over there? Stop cheating. You're not supposed to cheat at the game. Just win normally. It's okay. You don't have to win this hard. Makes Essence of Dreams pretty good if you're in that scenario, but otherwise it's a little harder to play out. But if you're not offered anything better, it does work really well with Murloc. Finally, I want to cover Tiny Fin Onesie. People love to tell me in my games, buy this, buy this, buy this, buy this. And here's why. Well, let me tell you about it. It's start of combat. Your leftmost minion gains the stats of the highest health minion in your hand. And you're sitting there going, well, that's phenomenal, because I've seen it in chat a million times. They're like, you've got a 600 Bream counter. Play that out there. Put a little tiny minion you don't care about. Give it all those stats. And you're right. If you're putting it on a battle cry minion you've just been cycling, not too bad. It's getting a ton of stats. It's going to be good. The only problem with it is you're telegraphing what you're going to do. Your opponent, if they look at your trinkets, knows you are going to run a giant minion at their first minion. So that is either going to mean there's like a taunted Venom there, or a taunted giant statted minion with Divine Shield, or a Leroy just sitting there waving, going, how's it going? Want some chicken? I'm just not a huge fan of Tiny Fin Onesie because your opponent doesn't have to think hard about how to counter it. They just have to counter it. And I like it to where my opponent doesn't necessarily know exactly what they're going to do. They have to figure it out. They have to find the parts and pieces. Tiny Fin Onesie telegraphs what you're going to do. All right, let's talk countering Murlocs. How do we stop the Murlocs in the end of the game? And well, the typical things you're looking at is you just need things that ignore stats. You need things that say, I don't care how big you are, you're dead. Now, you might be able to keep some of your board. If you have some minions that are hugely statted, that are very effective, you can keep those. Maybe their effect they give will make it so your other minions are good. But anything that's a brand or a weird utility thing, that's utility drop. If it's not buffing you enough, and it's probably not to keep up with the Murloc board. Cut this, mech players. Find something else, something small to give you an advantage. Now, the kind of minions we're talking about are going to be Dagger Spine Thrasher, because hey, it can get Divine Shield, Wind Fury, and Venomous. Just make sure you have enough spells to activate that. That will kill at least one. If anything else, its second hit might just knock the Venom off one of the Murlocs if the Murlocs aren't that big. Because if it's a smaller Murloc board, if they're more just, hey, we've got Venom, then you've got that. You just got to bump it off, and your big guys sit way in back. That is an easy way to deal with some Murloc boards if they don't have giant stats. You put your big minions that you usually lead with, you stick them way in the back, put them in that slot 5, 6, and 7, and have slot 1 through 4 be throwaway minions whose only job is to absorb Venom. Have them run out there, absorb the Venom, then have your big guys do cleanup and just beat them up. You definitely can do that. Deadly Spore, it's not optimal, but it will kill one thing. And if you're replacing a Bran who's a 2/4 with a 1/1 that has Venomous, it's gonna kill something. As long as they don't Tunnel Blast or you don't Tunnel Blast for whatever reason, be careful of those counters. You can get in your own way for that. Leroy, the Reckless. Leroy is gonna hit one and kill it. Heaven forbid you've buffed him. I have been playing Naga builds and had a Leroy on the board, and I spit one of my deep blue buffs and it lands on the Leroy, and the Leroy's like a 600. It's like, well, he's gonna punch him to death, and then when he dies, he's taking him with him, so that works. Transmuted Bramble Witch. Whenever it hits, becomes a 3/3. Just make sure if they have a small taunt, you don't lead with your Bramble Witch and waste it. Another one is Operatic Belcher. You know Murlocs are in because they're running Murlocs. That's what we're countering. Take a Belcher and take anything else. Anything that's a Murloc or an all minion. The Belcher die first. It's gonna give the Venom to that all minion value. Can you get a Bascule? Can you golden that Bascule? Can you then hold 2 Belchers in your hand? Now you're kicking out more. So if you have a Belcher on the board, it dies, gives Venom to Bascule. Bascule dies. It's gonna kill what it hits. Brings out 2 more Belchers. Maybe you have 1 more all after that, and yeah, you could start whittling away at them, and hopefully this will do the job. And you might have to sell your entire board. There's times when you get to that last turn and you're the demon player and you're looking at the stats and you're like, shit, okay, I'm big. They're just as big. I need tricks. Start selling things. Get rid of those utility minions, folks. Those are great, but you have to cut them. Obviously, if you're in the top 4 and you don't really care and you just want to roll your stats, have fun. Try to outstat them. If you see Golden Young Murk-eye, if you see Murkies and Primal Fins on their board, you're not going to though, but you can try. Let's talk the builds. Let's talk about what we do when we're playing Murlocs. Now, the first one I'm going to talk about is kind of adjacent to what we just talked about in the countering section, but this is as a Murloc build itself, and I'm going to call that, because it is the Venom build, because it's toxic as hell, folks. Anything it hits dies. If you know your opponents are all running big stats, if they're giant elementals, if they're giant demons, make them sick and die. There you go. You're all set. The main minion in this build is, in this case, going to be the Belcher. This Belcher is going to hit something, kill it, and then Death Rattle give Venom to something else. That is what we're going for, so that's the idea. Well, how do we take advantage? Because if we've got Belchers, now we're not going to do that much. So, okay, I have just enough Belchers to kill all their minions. It's a tie. Well, that's why we want to have a Bascule, because if we have a Bascule, and yeah, maybe that has the Bream counter. Maybe you buffed that up enough where that can be competitive. Maybe it's just full of more Belchers. Whatever works, get them out there, buff up that board, and let it go. Now, typically, if I'm going to run this build, it depends on the situation. I will run a Titus for the extra triggers of that Venom to bounce it around more. Make sure you buff this board a little bit. If their health is all 2, and I'm playing a giant demon board, and I look at what you're doing, I'm just going to run a Tunnel Blaster and nuke them half to death. If most of them are dead, I don't have to worry about it anymore, because Venom doesn't matter if you don't have enough minions to deliver it. So make sure you buff up that baseline. Typically 6 to 10 is not bad. Anything after that, if someone pops out at you with a golden Titus and a golden Tunnel Blaster and a golden Macaw, let them have it. They sold everything and got incredibly lucky finding all the pieces they want. All right, so what is going to be the trinket we need to finish this build. Well, the lesser one we would have gotten a while ago. By the time we decided to do this build, at the earliest, it's going to be the greater trinket. I think the best thing we really can hit with this is going to be Twin Sky Lantern, because no matter what we're summoning out of our hand, summoning out extra copies of it makes it far more effective, right? If it's Venom, if it's stats, whatever it is we're kicking out, this is the trinket I like the most for this type of build. Now, typically you won't decide you're going a Venom build till a little later. It's usually the one you're starting to see that you're in a little trouble. But with the Murloc board build in general, and if you think you might be doing some big summoning from hand, I like this a lot in this build. What you're looking for is going to be Baskill and Belcher. Those are the most important minions in this build, and then you can fill it out with anything else. That is a Murloc or an all minion. And don't forget about the plethora of other minions from tribes and neutrals that you can use to really fill this out if you're missing a few pieces, or if the other minions are just not up to par. You can't find all of the Belchers, all the Baskills. You could put in things like Bramble Witch, Leroy, Dagger Spine Thrasher, Deadly Spore, anything to help you counter the stats your opponents are doing. If that's all you really need to do, these will help fill that out. It is not the most effective build against undead, against a mechs. If anything swarmy, a beast board hits it, it isn't going to do anything, but it will deal with a big stat board pretty well. Let's talk the final build. What does our main Murloc build look like? Typically, I don't consider myself playing Murlocs until I hit something like Nurglish Phrasebook on turn 6. If I hit that, I'm like, okay, I might be playing Murlocs. I'm at least buffing something in my hand. Also, if I see a Baskill and a Bream counter in the same shop and I don't have a clear direction, that gives me an option to at least sneak out an extra minion onto the board I shouldn't have, so that feels pretty good. Then if I hit a Bran, I'm like, okay, man, now I'm probably going to be doing some Murloc stuff. But I kind of consider those my signs. If I have these as my main pieces, I consider myself now probably a Murloc board. Now, when it comes to the greater trinkets on turn 9, if I'm playing this kind of build, all of the greater ones are kind of good. There's no real ones, but I'd say the best ones are probably going to be Nurglish Phrasebook, the greater, because if you've got a ton of stats, you now got even more stats, and it just kind of gets insane. You kind of get redundant though with this one for me, because you're already pretty big, especially if you had the lesser Nurglish Phrasebook. And yeah, you could keep getting bigger, but it depends what your opponents are doing. If they're just trying to outstat you, then yeah, you can go nuts with this. But if they're trying to tech, if they're trying to use Venom, more stats aren't what you need. Bronze Beard Portrait, of course, is great if you haven't found a brand yet, or maybe when it's offered you, somehow you already have 2 and you're like, well, this is a triple. Maybe you have 1, there's another in the shop, and you've got this, and it's like, hey, yeah, definitely. Otherwise, Twin Sky Lantern, if you're summoning, even, it doesn't matter what it is, big minions or Venom, as long as you're kicking out additional minions, that is huge. And no one's really going to be able to counter you if you get to a certain stat level and you have this, because you're just going to be too big with way too many minions. There's no scam to keep up. Now we're going to look for the other Murlocs we'd be digging for. Well, let's see. If this is our main part, I would say the next step in this evolution, if you can hit it, is going to be mrglin'burglar. Because every time you play a Murloc, it's going to buff a Murloc in your hand. It's going to buff a minion on your board. And it's just really, really high tempo. So if you can hit a mrglin'burglar, take that. Otherwise, next you're looking for young murk-eye. Now, young murk-eye enables some sneaky battle cry stuff, because at the end of your turn, he's going to trigger those battle cries adjacent to him. So you could keep cycling, or if you find really good ones, just keep them on the board permanently to buff your board or add minions to your hand. So if you have a Primal Fin next to it, have a Murky, you have time to put both on there, go nuts. It's not horrible if you have a brand and you could triple a Primal Fin to just keep that thing there. The same is true for Murky. Just probably don't keep both of them. That's gonna get tough to figure out what to cycle and what to cut. But if you have a young Murk-eye and you've got a golden either Murky or Primal Fin, you're either throwing out a ton of stats or a ton of minions into your hand, and that's really easy value. You're getting all those stats. Your mrglin'burglar's like having a good time buffing your hand and your board, and you're just gonna get out of control completely, really fast. Okay, so we have our board, right? We're done. We've got all the things we need. We've got a bunch of minions, we've got a bunch of stats, our hands buffed to no end. I would say the final piece to this, Now, is it an optional piece? I don't really think so. I feel like there's not a whole lot of optional in this, but mrglin'burglar, at some point, do start cutting what's on your board. Now, the first minions I usually want to cut are going to be that young murk-eye in this battle cry. If you can cut that, you cut those with a mrglin'burglar, and all those stats in your hand, you get again on one of the minions on your board. And that just is insane value, almost like it shouldn't exist. It's so much when you figure out all the stats you've thrown onto your board, into your hand, and now Coral's sitting there absorbing them on the board and taking advantage of all the stats you already put in the hand and you get to bring out again. It gets crazy. Murlocs don't quite work like other boards so much that you're just trying to triple low tier minions. It's like a slow evolution process to eventually where you just hit critical mass. You finally get your whole board to sitting around 4, 5, and 6, and you're just gold in insane stats. A giant Murloc board is really second to really nothing in the game because of the fact that you have 8 or 9 minions. Because if you golden the Baskill, it's summoning out 2. If you get 2 golden Baskills, that's another. Gets Murlocs defy typical boards when they get really big. They just break the game wide open. They run away with it and have a really good time. Well, you do if you're playing them. Your opponent does if it's them. All right, that's it. That's Murlocs. I like Murlocs because I like APM. I like to cycle cards. Murlocs can be problematic because sometimes you don't hit the cards in the right order. And sometimes your opponent seems to get all of them while you're sitting there with half of it, but they've got all of it. And you're like, well, I'm dead. That's always the case, right? I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned a few things. I hope it makes Murlocs a little more approachable for you and you can have a good time with them. Please leave some feedback, leave a comment. It really does help the video and it helps me know what you like about these videos and maybe don't like. Thanks again, folks. I'll catch you in the Battlegrounds. Until then, have a good one. Later.